California, a play it safe status quo state? No, not typically, but that's where voters landed with Javier Becerra over Tom Steyer. And yet, Republicans like Steve Hilton for governor and Spencer Pratt for LA mayor beat a surprisingly loud drumbeat for change. Did President Trump really drop the F-bomb on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over Israeli military attacks deep within Lebanon or planned ones? Answer, yes. Mark Caputo, the Axios reporter who helped break that story, joins us with more details, including BB's reaction. A federal judge recently ordered President Trump's name be stripped from the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts and plans to shutter it for years, halted. Ohio Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Beatty brought that lawsuit and explains what's next. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. The dust has settled in Iowa's primaries, and it is beginning to settle in California. We will have the most important races and some undercovered races in both states with Julie Watts in California and Lana Zak in Iowa. And, of course, we'll have your friend in mine, Anthony Salvanto, with the numbers inside the numbers. Iowa saw a rare setback for President Trump in the governor's race. His candidate, the one he endorsed, Congressman Randy Feenstra, did not win his party's nomination. And California will no doubt be roiled by the long-shot insurgent candidacies of Republican Steve Hilton for governor and Spencer Pratt for mayor of Los Angeles. Neither mention Trump much, but they do bash bureaucratic lethargy, housing shortages, educational stagnation, and outsized affordability woes, which persist in California even when inflation nationally is relatively tame. And we all know inflation isn't tame right now. Now, California's lopsided Democratic voter registration means neither Hilton nor Pratt is on a path to win in the general election. But that may matter less than how Hilton and Pratt will inevitably use voter dissatisfaction and agitation for change to alter the course of promises made in the City of Angels and in Sacramento. Iowa could be on the cusp of seismic tremors more familiar to the topography of California. You see, Democrats have not won a governor's race there since 2006. They haven't won a Senate race there since 2008. Both appear possible this cycle, even though President Trump carried the state, as we discussed last night, by 13 points in 2024. We start tonight, as promised, with our CBS investigative correspondent, Julie Watts, who is in Sacramento. Julie, great to see you. Let's start with that mayor's race in L.A.
So, it's still too early to call. We do know that Karen Bass will be one of the top two. The question is now, is it Spencer Pratt or Nithya Raman? And, I do think it's important to note here that in the last election, at this point, Rick Caruso was out ahead. And then LA got basically a big dump of progressive ballots in at the last minute. And that brought Karen Bass up to the winning spot. So could we see more votes coming in for Nithya as we see these votes come in, as we see these ballots come in? Keep in mind, we are a mostly mail-in ballot state, so a lot of those votes still out there. The one thing that I'm told that is for certain is we will see Pratt come down and Nithya Raman come up before the end of this, which could be sort of concerning or disheartening for the Pratt supporters. That does not mean that she's definitely going to win, but there certainly will be more twists and turns before we get to the end of this story.
Julie, I'm very glad you mentioned that. I might have been premature in my declaration about what Spencer Pratt may or may not do in the general. He's got to qualify first, meaning finish in the top two. The governor's race, do you believe that one is more or less resolved?
I think for all intents and purposes, it is pretty resolved. At this point, it would be very difficult for Tom Steyer to get enough votes, even though there are still a lot of ballots outstanding, to surpass either Javier Becerra or Steve Hilton. I do think one thing that's notable is, and we mentioned this in some of the segments we did early on in this election season, but Eric Swalwell got 18,000 votes. He obviously dropped out amid scandal. Betty Yee, who dropped out, got 25,000 votes. So there are a lot of votes going to people who are not those top three. So even if Tom Steyer, you just can't realistically imagine that Tom Steyer could get enough votes. But again, listen, there have been so many plot twists in this governor's election. I'm not ruling anything out. I just don't think, and I think the most people don't think it's likely.
Speaking of plot twists, there is a fascinating development in the House race, District 6. And this is fascinating in light of what was redrawn in California and Kevin Kiley, Republican, switching party identification to independent. What's going on?
Yeah, this is actually, to me, I think the most exciting race as we move towards the general. Well, first of all, I live in District 6, so I'm a little biased. However, Kevin Kiley switched, as you mentioned, from a Republican to an independent. He is, for lack of a better way to put it, a firebrand. He is an anti-Newsom Republican, or at least he has been, pro-MAGA Republican. And when they redrew this district, he was one of the key people they were trying to get rid of and replace with a Democrat, right? Well, this showing that he has right now 28,000 votes, not just in Placer County, which is more conservative and which was part of his original district, but also getting votes sort of in top third or fourth spot in Sacramento County, in Yolo County, which is very sort of progressive. It leans blue. That is shocking. Here's what's even more shocking is this district was drawn specifically to not allow for this to happen. But right now there is a chance, albeit it's still early, but the Republican, Michael Sansfield, who is for all intents and purposes sort of an unknown, but he was the only name on the ballot with an R next to it. He and Kiley could be the top two, meaning there would not be a Democrat in this district in the general election that was drawn specifically to give Democrats a seat in the House. And, honestly, Major, what's even more interesting to me is if we saw Kiley win. So let's say the logic is that Richard Pan will come up and that it will end up being Kiley and Richard Pan on the ballot in the general election. The standard thinking is there's no way that that somebody who is not a Democrat could win this newly drawn district. But I leave you with this. Steve Poizner was a Republican in California. He ran as an independent for insurance commissioner in 2018. He lost. But I am told he won this newly drawn district as a Republican turned independent. Could Kevin Kiley be the first independent to win a major race in California? To me, that's what's most interesting about all of this. And I will tell you that national Democrats are probably looking at District 6 right now saying, what did we do wrong? And what can we do to make sure that Kiley does not win in November?
And one of the quick dynamics for Richard Pan, the Democrat who is closest to getting into that top two, is there were other Democrats in the race who divided the Democratic vote, and that made it more complicated for Richard Pan. We'll keep an eye on the 6th District of California. Julie Watts, thank you very much. To help us understand the dynamics of today's primaries or the results that we know from yesterday's primaries in Iowa, let's bring in CBS's Lana Zak, who joins us from Iowa City. Lana, take it away.
Oh, it's great to talk to you, Major. Let's talk about what an interesting state Iowa is, because not only did President Trump win it in the last 3 elections, it has trended more conservative and more Republican in each subsequent election. So it is notable that his endorsed candidate for the governorship, Randy Feenstra, he didn't actually win the Republican primary. That honor instead went to Zach Lane. He's a farmer and a businessman. We're going to see how he connects with that MAGA base, which he continued to reach out to even after he didn't receive that endorsement. He's also been really plugged into MAHA, which in this state, which has high cancer rates, that combination with his own experiences as a farmer potentially is going to be very powerful for him, though it is a notable loss in President Trump, whose popularity ratings have really cratered, particularly among rural and white voters across the country, and here especially as people have faced higher gas prices, farmers have been struggling, and the war is increasingly unpopular, Major.
And that may be something that gives Democrats hope in not only the governor's race, but specifically in the Senate race. What happened there?
Well, in the Senate race, easily Congresswoman Ashley Hinton took away the Republican nomination. That wasn't a surprise for anyone, but what was much more neck and neck was the Democratic nomination. And I thought that the fact that Zach Walz, who was much more of a progressive, who campaigned against Chuck Schumer and actually pledged that he would not vote for the minority leader, the leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate, that didn't resonate with Democrats here. Instead, we saw really how people became excited about Josh Turek speaking to that populist message at a time when people are struggling or fearful financially. You know, his ads here in Iowa were talking about growing up and having the wrong color lunch ticket, about how he knew what it was like to grow up and have a subsidized meal and some of the shame and the pain. He received a lot of money from Washington, from a veterans organization, even though he himself is not a veteran. He's a Paralympian who's medaled. And Democrats really see him as the best potential chance they have to win that Senate seat from Joni Ernst. It is going to be a nail-biter, Major. We are really interested in what's happening in Iowa.
Joni Ernst not running for re-election. Ashley Hinson, Josh Turek will be in the general election. Lana Zak, thank you very, very much. Want to bring in, you know it, you love it, your friend and mine, CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, who has the numbers inside the numbers on the House, an untold story. So, Anthony, please, I beg of you, take it away.
And first, Major, folks know, they watch us. It's been an election. They're going to see maps, right?
Maps.
And between you and I, right, they know they're going to see Southern California maps if we get a chance.
For sure.
Let's unpack this. Look, let me show you the Steve Hilton vote here, because there really is a story in it. And all day people have been asking me, when are you going to call California? Well, you know, there is a chance, an outside chance, that Steyer could make up some ground here, but we'll keep an eye on that. Big story out of this is my expected vote has gone up to over 9 million. People probably saw us last night. I wrote 8.5 million on the board. They said, oh, no, they're going to turn out. So they did turn out in force yesterday. The purple areas here are Steve Hilton's counties where he won. He really consolidated that Republican vote. I'm going to go down here, and courtesy of our friends at Vote Hub, I'm going to zoom in to Southern California because there's a story in this. If I first go up to Orange County, you're going to see these areas here in yellow, Santa Ana, a little more Hispanic vote. And the Democratic vote there, okay, that went for Becerra. But look at all these areas in purple, wealthier areas, Newport Beach, et cetera, all where Hilton consolidated that Republican vote. And, of course, I'm going to take you down to San Diego, right? Here's San Diego, central part of the city. Same kind of story where you saw as you got out towards El Cajon and further out then towards Inland Empire, Hilton again consolidating that Republican vote. So he basically did what he needed to do going into this. That's really your story. And last piece is, I remind everybody, this count is pretty typical for California. We don't always notice because it's not always competitive, but it takes days for all of this to unfold. So sort of hang on and be patient. We'll get updates every evening.
Anything else from last night catch your eye, Anthony?
Yeah, real quick, I want to show you another House race I'm keeping my eye on, and this is the 40th. Here's another one where you may or may not see a Democrat get into the runoff. Remember, after redistricting in Prop 50, Democrats were counting on California to have at least 4 or 5 more districts lean their way. If Democrats don't get into the runoffs here, a lot of that goes away. So that's certainly one to keep an eye on, and a couple that'll be competitive, the 45th and the 48th as we go towards November. So keep an eye on that Southern California region again, because control of the House may well go through California come November, Major.
Which means we'll all be up very late at night. Anthony Salvanto, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. Iran launched deadly strikes on Kuwait Wednesday, targeting U.S. bases as part of what it described as self-defense strikes. Iran also hit Kuwait's international airport, killing at least one person and injuring dozens of others. Despite these attacks, President Trump said today that peace talks are ongoing and that Iranian Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei is directly involved in those talks. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now from the North Lawn. Ed, catch us up on where things stand.
Well, the president not ruling out the possibility of extensive military action again should the talks fail, and continuing to say that he'd like to see resolution, but that military action could conceivably end this once and for all if it gets there. He was asked again as well about the concerns that this is causing such economic pain, and he continued to say that focusing on eliminating Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon is issue number one for him, and that the short-term economic pain is still worth it. So, you know, again, while there were volleys lobbed at Kuwait today by Iran, and while the specter of military conflict remains. There doesn't appear, at least so far, to have been any real significant diplomatic progress in the last day or two or so.
And Ed, it's very interesting what the president said, because if we were to put up a sort of split screen today with the president and his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio, he was on the Hill telling a House committee that Operation Epic Fury is over, that the war is effectively over, and the priorities or goals of that military campaign have been achieved, and we're in a sort of different space, which brought some very deep skepticism from many House Democrats.
He did, and it's repeating what he had told senators on Tuesday. And part of the reason why the administration is saying this now in congressional testimony after suggesting it in writing to Congress a few weeks ago is because they don't want any kind of debate over the legality of the war and whether Congress needs to authorize it to begin. Their argument is because we're in this ceasefire and those hostilities, the active hostilities have ended, there's no need for you to run out the clock, 60 days or so, to begin debating whether or not you should authorize this war. They don't want that, A, because they're going to lose Republican votes on it if they do, and B, it's going to put many Republicans in uncomfortable positions having to vote for or against a war that right now, with the American public at least, with the midterm elections approaching, is still deeply unpopular.
Ed O'Keefe, North Lawn of the White House. Thank you very much, sir. Still to come on the Takeout, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham wants to take another run at the just abandoned anti-weaponization fund. What does he have in mind? We'll try to find out. Also, a new White House artificial intelligence executive order. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman making the rounds with congressional leaders. The latest on AI models, regulations, and what the White House wants to see first. Plus, New Jersey Republican Congressman Tom Kean Jr. has not been seen in Washington for months. What is wrong? When is he coming back? Our political panel will discuss that and a lot more. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. This very much caught our eye. Earlier this week, Axios was the first to report details of a phone conversation between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In that call, Trump called his Israeli counterpart effing crazy. That's a direct quote. Earlier, I spoke with Mark Caputo, White House reporter for Axios, who helped break that story. We won't get into the precise vulgarisms in the conversation between the President of the United States and the Israeli Prime Minister, but summarize them for us, Mark, and when this happened and why.
On Monday, Donald Trump got steamed with Prime Minister Netanyahu because Netanyahu had launched this invasion and this attack on Lebanon and southern Lebanon. It had led the Iranians to say, we're done with peace talks. And Trump got him on the horn and really lit into him, said, you're effing crazy. What the F are you doing? I'm keeping your behind out of prison. And basically, you need to know when to stop. And the description that we were given of this is Donald Trump was really steamed. He subsequently came out on a New York Post podcast and said that, well, I wasn't really angry, I was perturbed, but he confirmed he indeed did say that to Netanyahu.
And very quickly, to remind the audience, Hezbollah is operating in Lebanon. They're a terrorist proxy of Iran, attacking Israel. They've been going back and forth, very much testing the fragility of this ceasefire. But Iran has identified that as crucial to deeper ceasefire talks, and he talks about their future nuclear ambition.
Right. It also, the Iranians sort of gave up the game. They used to sort of deny that they were involved with this terrorist group, but indeed they are. And there's a theory that there are some Iranian factions that are trying to sabotage the peace talks by getting Hezbollah to attack Israel and having Israel respond and then have the rest of Iran say, oh, we can't participate in it.
But there's some elements of the Trump administration that wonder if Israel's not also trying to maximize its military potential and possibly also, if not sabotage, complicate to a very strong degree the negotiations.
Yeah, welcome to the four-dimensional chess of the Middle East with a lot of firepower, right, explosives, missiles, drones. I mean, it's really a complicated situation, and it doesn't look like it's getting any less complicated.
And there's another thing the president, in your piece with Barak Ravid, said to the Israeli prime minister that strikes me as interesting. He said, the world hates Israel and hates you for doing this, sort of saying that it's not just between you and I, Prime Minister Netanyahu, you have an image problem.
Right, and that's really important to Donald Trump, who pays attention to that sort of thing. And it also means that Trump himself.
I mean, to verbalize it, though, that way.
Right. Well, he's not only said that to Netanyahu there, he's privately said that as well. There are, I need to phrase this properly and carefully, there are people in the Trump administration who are gravely concerned that Netanyahu has been, in the words of one of them, too bloodthirsty in the way in which he's prosecuted the war in Gaza against Hamas and now against Hezbollah, and that it has led to this circumstance. Now, Netanyahu's defenders, let's be clear, say that's completely unfair. He needs to do this. Otherwise, they were encircled by a, quote, ring of fire that the Iranians were stoking.
Does this in any way, this conversation and the intensity of it, Mark, from your reporting, suggest a breaking apart of this relationship?
I don't think so. I think these guys are like brothers, and brothers sometimes fight. And this is a case where the bigger brother took the younger brother to the woodshed.
Mark Caputo, always great stuff. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Coming up, former Congressman George Santos may be back in some kind of investigatory or legal hot water while he's facing allegations of prediction market manipulation. We will explore next here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thank you for hanging out with us. Here's a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. A win, that's how you can describe it, for Republicans in the nationwide redistricting battle, this time in Alabama. Supreme Court ruled that Alabama can use a 2023 congressional map that eliminates one of two majority black districts. In a 6-3 decision, the High Court lifted a lower federal court ruling that prevented the state from using that very map. The lower federal court found that Alabama had intentionally discriminated against black voters when that map was put together. Back in April, you might recall, the High Court weakened a key part at Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act when it ruled against a Louisiana congressional map. CBS News has learned the Justice Department is now investigating former Congressman George Santos, you see him there, for possibly manipulating predictive trading markets. According to sources, the online prediction marketplace Kalshi noticed suspicious trades and contacted investigators. What were they suspicious about? Well, officials say Santos boasted online about going to attend the State of the Union, President Trump's State of the Union, then bet against his attendance. Santos says he's unaware of the investigation. Last year, President Trump commuted Santos's prison sentence for wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. We're also following new news just happened moments ago. The House has passed a resolution limiting President Trump's war powers in Iran. Nicole Killian has the latest from Capitol Hill. Nicole, what happened?
Yeah, well, this is a pretty significant development, Major, because as you know, both the House and Senate have at various times tried to push these war powers resolutions unsuccessfully. But today, for the first time, the House was successful in advancing this resolution to, in effect, block the president from ordering further strikes against Iran. Now, granted, this is just a resolution. It would still have to come over to the Senate, but it does show, given that there was bipartisan support for this resolution, this growing unrest and skepticism on the part of many lawmakers about the war. Of course, from the outset, many Democrats have argued that congressional authorization should be required in instances of declaring war. And we just had Secretary Rubio here on Capitol Hill earlier today, in effect saying that the war had ended, that Operation Epic Fury had concluded. But many Democratic lawmakers challenged him on that, noting that there are still these strikes that are occurring. Rubio pushed back, saying those are defensive strikes, that these are just hostilities. But again, there continues to be this ongoing tension between Capitol Hill and the White House over the endgame for this war. This is really the first opportunity we've seen in terms of lawmakers trying to force the administration's hand here.
And Nicole, forgive me, I know this just happened, but any sense of what the final tally was or how many Republicans crossed over?
Yeah, I believe the vote tally was 215 to 208. I've got to pull it up. But again, we know, I believe it. I believe it was four Republicans rather, who voted in favor of this. I'll have to pull this up at a later time to try to confirm. 215 to 208. No, that's correct. So again, this will now head over to the Senate. And the Senate did clear a similar measure not too long ago, just on a procedural vote, where we also saw some Republicans cross over to vote with Democrats. So again, even though Republicans have been supportive of the president's efforts and have tried to give the administration some runway here with respect to the ongoing conflict around, obviously, patience is wearing thin in both parties. And again, this vote today is a sign of that.
Nimble and accurate as always, Nicole Killian, pulling up the data as I ask you for it. Thank you very much for that. Let's talk about what Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina Republican, has tried to put on the table to preserve some mechanism of compensating Americans who believe they were somehow victims of Justice Department weaponization during the Biden administration. What is he talking about, and how is it so far, best you can tell, been received?
Yeah, that's right. Well, look, I think, I talked to both GOP leaders yesterday ahead of acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's testimony, where he said, in effect, this $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund is dead. Of course, Lindsey Graham, shortly after that declaration, then went on to say, I'm proposing that we create this weaponization fund for those in particular who feel they had been wronged by the previous administration. So he still feels that there should be an avenue for that. And quite frankly, the president hasn't necessarily officially closed the door to any type of fund here, despite Todd Blanche's declaration to House appropriators yesterday. In fact, Todd Blanche wouldn't even commit to putting this in writing, that this anti-weaponization fund would not move forward. That being said, it was sufficient enough for Senate Republicans to move forward with a reconciliation bill that was being held up because of their concerns about this fund. So the Senate is now moving forward with that funding package to fund both ICE and Border Patrol, no longer funding the White House ballroom, no longer seeking guardrails in terms of this weaponization fund in light of Blanche's testimony yesterday, Major.
And Nicole, bear with me. I know you know this. I want to let my audience know while you're there. Senator Lindsey Graham is referring to the Federal Tort Claims Act, passed in 1946, which allows, under certain circumstances, the United States can be sued for monetary damage if a private person would be liable in accordance with the law of the place where the negligent or wrongful act or omission occurred, which means, bottom line, it's a much, much higher bar, much more complicated legal process to obtain any recompense than this anti-weaponization fund, now dead, would have provided. Nicole Killian, thanks for indulging me there, and thanks for the breaking news coverage, as always. I appreciate it. I want to turn now to Congresswoman Joyce Beatty from Ohio, Democrat. Congresswoman, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. You're just from the House floor, where for the first time since hostilities with Iran began, War Powers resolution passed. Give me your reaction.
Well, yes, it passed. Democrats were very victorious. Speaker Johnson brought a bill to the floor that he couldn't pass. There was a difference of some 7 or 8 members to make it pass. And look, today my reaction is one of, I'm glad it's done. I'm glad it's over. The American people didn't need to have hundreds of billions of dollars spent on a war when we can't still afford gasoline and the prices of food is high and people are looking at their health premiums. So Democrats stood united. We supported it because it was the right thing to do. And when we think about the laws in this country, it should have been in our hands, and today was a victory.
Speaking of laws, you were the litigant in a case brought against the president and the board of the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, changing the name, and the president's decision to attempt to close down the Kennedy Center, he says, for renovations for several years. And a federal judge has blocked both of that. What happens next?
Well, right now, as you know, in the judge's opinion that he wrote, we have 14 days for us to wait and see that Donald Trump and his administration, they were given 14 days to take his name off the building. Also, there was a halt put on his closing the facility for 2 years, and certainly we were afraid that if he closed it for 2 years, he would probably do development that would keep it closed. We know what happened at the East Wing at the White House. He was going to do renovations, and the next thing we knew, the Rose Garden was gone and he had demolished it. So we are thinking that same thing could happen to the Kennedy Center. So we are talking with members who have reached out from the board. I think that's a good sign. In all of the rage that the president responded to it, at one time in one of those rants, he said, I'll just give it back to the Congress. So I think there are a lot of options for us. We've had performers call, we've had former employees call. So right now, people are so excited that we have the opportunity to be able to have the Kennedy Center in the way that the law was written for it to be, the only living memorial named after John F. Kennedy.
So, Congresswoman, in that very long social media post, a very angry one, as you mentioned, the president said, we are going to be working with Congress to transfer, these are his words, this failing institution back to them so they can make a determination as to what to do with it. And by extension, he said, that would give to Congress the responsibility for its operation, maintenance, and management. What does that mean, and is that fundamentally different than what the law already creates?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a combination of what the law creates, because already the Congress has the control over the Kennedy Center in much of what they do. We have ex officio members, we have the Speaker as a member, we have the House Leader, the President of the Senate, and we have other members there. Obviously, there are other members that are appointed by the President of the United States, but here's the thing. We have given hundreds of millions of dollars for renovation. I've already spoken to the operation manager of the Kennedy Center. He has said that we could do the renovations and still keep the Kennedy Center open. So I think there's a lot of positive things that we could move forward to, and there's no reason we can't let performances like the symphony or the orchestra play in different places. We have the Reach building, which is relatively new. So there are a lot of creative things we could do, and so we're excited about moving forward.
Congressman, before I let you go, very quickly, in his social media post, the president also said that the Kennedy Center, as it is now, is a danger to public safety. He said things would collapse on people, parking garages, and all sorts of other things. Is there anything that you're aware of at the Kennedy Center that is a public health risk?
Absolutely not. A few weeks ago, I took the tour with many others. Are there things that need to be done? Absolutely. But it is not to the point that the president said. And think about it this way. If that was so true, would you have held the viewing of your wife's movie there? Would you have hosted some of the wealthiest people in the country and your friends there in the last few weeks? Absolutely not. Construction, yes. We need to do all of the things that were in the report that we had experts come in and tell us about the soffits, about things in the garage, and we will do those things because we had planned to do those things anyway. I think he's over-exaggerating it. He has continued to host and have people there.
Congresswoman Joy Speedy, Democrat of Ohio, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. What does it take right now to regulate artificial intelligence? No one in Washington really knows. The future of this groundbreaking technology, as a very prominent, well-known AI leader on Capitol Hill today, exploring what is possible or what he would like to try to stop. We'll have more on that when we come back. This is The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Welcome to the Conversation Corner. Regulating artificial intelligence, well, it is, to put it mildly, a very hotly discussed topic on Capitol Hill, day in and day out. Today, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman held meetings with some heavyweights. House Speaker Mike Johnson, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. I mean, that's called making the rounds. Altman is fighting proposals that would require developers to obtain government approval before releasing brand new AI models. According to Politico, negotiators in the House are hoping by the end of this week to unveil a bipartisan AI regulation bill. Jordan Ray Kelly joins me now. She's Senior Managing Director at FTI Consulting. She's also the former Director for Cyber Incident Response on the National Security Council. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So about this executive order that came from the White House this week, long anticipated, went through many iterations, then it just popped up on the website with no fanfare whatsoever, highly unusual for a White House executive order. But it says, according to Politico, or represents, these are Politico's words, a sea change in Washington's willingness to tighten oversight of this technology. Also, Politico says it could pave the way for mandatory vetting, federal pre-approval of advanced AI systems, and other regulations. You agree with that assessment?
I think that assessment is right, but I think you have to look at what this administration has done since it began on AI specifically. You go back to January 2025, they put out an executive order that said we're going to win this race on AI. And
full steam ahead.
Full steam ahead. And by July, we have an AI action plan that says we're going out. We're, as you use your term, full steam ahead. That is absolutely what they were pushing. And now here we are 11 months later, and this executive order that dropped yesterday has a really interesting word in there that has security. It's about accelerating with innovation and security. And so now there's a lot of, we need to do this, comma, but there's a lot of things of what are we thinking of? And so I believe that what we are seeing here, that sea change that was described by Politico, is really a recognition that this is going to be a balancing act. This isn't just going to be about accelerating the innovation. This is going to be about figuring out the accountability aspects, figuring out the risk management aspects. And I think it's a really good signal for all of us.
And the executive order has a set of days by which it wants advanced companies working in the AI space to provide the government some awareness of their newest models. Do I have that about right?
One way I heard it described is that it's really trying to engineer a window of opportunity. It's trying to give itself
For whom?
Well, exactly. For whom, right? So to be able to have researchers have that 30-day window to potentially patch vulnerabilities that could have really sweeping consequences for our critical infrastructure. 30 days is a really short window. But I think with what we've seen in the last year with some of these frontier models, it would have been very strange for them to not ask for that voluntary cooperation. And certainly that's what the lawmakers are thinking about now, is whether that voluntary cooperation is going to be enough.
And how do you assess the attitude of Congress on trying to jump in and wrap their arms around legislation, not just executive orders or federal regulation?
I think there's really been two camps that we've seen in Congress. There's been we need to accelerate, we need to go out there, or others.
Full steam ahead.
Right. Others are going to beat us, right? And there's a strategic innovation to doing more, faster, better. Absolutely. The nation state angle of it is really pushing those who are in that accelerate camp. But then there's also the accountability camp, which is what are we going to do to protect children? What are we going to do to secure our elections? What are we going to do to avoid deepfakes? And balancing that is really challenging. And underpinning all of it, we would be remiss to not note that in last year alone, over 1,000 bills were introduced at the state legislature level dealing with AI. So Congress is also asking itself, should we be responsible for this national framework? Are we really going to ask companies to comply with this disparate network, much like what we see in cybersecurity, a patchwork of regulations across the states? And so all of those questions are being asked on the Hill. And I think that I would be more surprised if we see something that's really sweeping. I think what we will see instead is, as specific risks come up, Congress will feel obligated to act to respond to them. But I think to come up with legislation that covers all bases would be really challenging.
This is an ongoing conversation, and we will have you back because, quite clearly, you know your stuff. Jordan Ray Kelly, thank you very much for that perspective. I appreciate it. Coming up, more warnings about the possible political implications of the war in Iran. Will farmers, beset by higher prices, abandon Republicans in the midterms if inflation keeps irritating them? We will discuss that with our political panel next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. It's a new op-ed in the Washington Post that suggests the war in Iran and President Trump's trade policies pose some particular risks for Republicans in the midterms with a key coalition, farmers. Former Mike Pence chief of staff, Mark Short, points out that 94% of farmers say their financial situation has either worsened or remained the same. That means no one, virtually, is saying it's gotten any better. He writes, quote, states whose economies rely on agriculture are struggling, and it's showing up in the polls. He wrote a lot of other things, but we excerpted that. So let's bring in our political panel and Mark Short, Republican strategist, who wrote the piece, and Democratic strategist Mo Walethi. So, Mark, you wrote it. Talk to me about it.
Well, Major, thanks for having me back.
Sure. You're always welcome here.
Look, I think that there's no doubt that the price of fertilizer has continued to increase, and that's hurting farmers.
Diesel, fertilizer, regular commodities?
Absolutely. But I think it's also preceded the war with this trade policy.
Tariffs.
And the reality is that not only has tariffs elevated a lot of prices, but it's closed markets. And, you know, I've been somebody who has supported the president's policy largely in the first administration toward China. But his universal attack on trade across the globe has created challenges where now farmers do not have supplemental markets to sell products. Canada was one of our primary trading partners in agricultural products, and they're not accepting them now because of the positions this administration has taken toward Canada, who has been one of our allies and best trading partners. And so,
does this show up in Iowa? Does this show up in Ohio? Does this show up in Wisconsin? The president's going to be in Wisconsin Friday touting his farmer-friendly agenda.
I think it's going to show up in a lot of farm states. Major. I worry for Republicans, you know, not just in Iowa, I think, where you saw a lower turnout, but you also saw an area where Feenstra was the Trump-endorsed candidate.
Yeah.
And he comes from the agricultural part of the state. He's not from an urban part of Des Moines. He's from the agricultural part of the Steve King district that often used to elect Republicans. And the fact that he, I think, was overwhelmed by a candidate who's actually from Kansas, who just recently moved to Iowa,
Zach Lane,
I think is a reflection of the frustration that many farmers are feeling in the sense they maybe just won't turn out because they feel like, look, I'm not getting help right here, and I'm going to stay home. And that's going to be really detrimental to Republicans. Iowa's a state that voted for Trump by 13 points in 24. But, you know, it's a state that I think is in play for Democrats, not just in the governor's race, but honestly in the Senate race, too.
Well, I know you agree with everything you just heard, so I'm not going to
say it often, but this man is brilliant. Listen to everything he just said.
Give me your takeaways from California.
California, it's interesting, right? Not long ago, my side was freaking out over the possibility that Democrats might be boxed out of the governor's race. That's not the case. It looks like at least one.
Javier Becerra will cruise to victory.
I think Becerra will be in there, and you know, there's still a chance Steyer might be the second. So we'll see. One of the most interesting things, though, between both the governor's race and the LA mayor's race is that the establishment candidates on the Democratic side seem to actually be leading. The more centrist candidates seem to be leading. And we've seen that with a few exceptions. But around the country, as this primary season progresses, is that the center left in the Democratic Party seems to be still where most of the energy is, and California is the latest example of that.
Tom Kean, Jr. is a member of Congress from New Jersey, a Republican. He hasn't been on Capitol Hill since March. He won't disclose what's wrong with him or what's going on. The House Speaker says he'll be back eventually. He put out a statement yesterday, I'm coming back, but nobody knows why. This seems to be a very odd circumstance, Mo.
Yeah. Look, I give him a lot of grace if he's got a medical condition that he needs to be out. But you can tell people what it is. Tell people that. Republicans were not wrong to demand more transparency from the Biden administration when it came to health, whether it was the president, whether it was Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, when he had a medical procedure but didn't tell people. The Republicans were not wrong to demand transparency. I think that same standard should apply here.
Mark?
I think it should apply, too, but I don't think I should let Mo's previous statement stand, that it's centrist candidates across the board. In New Jersey, you just nominated a candidate who volunteered with al-Qaeda in Bosnia. He was a defense witness for the World Trade Center bombings, and he's now their nominee in New Jersey. You have a candidate in Maine who's a neo-Nazi. And, you know, if if Republicans were foolish enough to nominate somebody like that, they'd be condemned. When Democrats do, it's like we're expanding our base, and somehow we're reaching new voters. And so the notion that they're actually nominating moderate candidates is absurd.
No, it's not absurd. I did say that there were some exceptions, and you just named two of them. But across the board, when the story of this primary season is written, I think you'll see more center-left.
Do you think there's anything interesting in American politics to pay attention to if Spencer Pratt makes it into the final two in the LA mayor's race, that someone who is a reality TV star who put together a couple of whiz-bang virtual ads could run somewhat competitively?
Yeah, I think my two big takeaways. One, despite what I just said about the center-left and the establishment, there still is an anti-establishment that feeling out there that is incredibly strong. Number two, the era of seriousness in our politics seems to be fading very rapidly.
Mo Aletha, you get the last word. Mark Short, great to have you with you. Keep writing those op-eds. We'll have you on the show. Roll the prompter, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Wednesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever, op-ed friendly. The Daily Report coming your way next.